Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crosswinds Church. I'm Sarah, and I am so glad that you joined us today. So now we are holding outdoor services on Sundays at 9 a.m. for up to 100 people here on campus. They last about 45 minutes and include a few worship songs and a message. Being together safely is so refreshing, and these mornings have been so special, so you are invited. Registration is open online 1 week in advance, so make sure to reserve your spot so that you can join us on Sunday. If you'd rather watch from home, you can still connect to our live chat at 10 a.m. on Sundays. Just look for the banner on our website that says Sunday Morning Live Chat. This is a way that we can be the church at home and chat with each other and some pastors while we tune in to hear God's Word together. Creekside Center has a workshop coming up, so here's Jody to tell you a little more about it.
Well, hey everyone, I want to take a minute and invite you to something you probably don't know you need right now, but chances are you really feel it. 2020 has most likely taken its toll on your soul. And what I mean by that is there is probably a fatigue you're experiencing that you cannot put your finger on, and you're trying to best just to kind of figure out what is missing and why you can't seem to just kind of recover your life, even a sense of peace and contentment in the midst of everything. Well, the answer to doing that is found in something called centering prayer. And centering prayer is just this simple method of prayer that's rooted in a really ancient tradition. It's a change from what we're used to. Instead of us asking from God, it's more about just sitting and learning how to receive from God and learning how to rest in Him. And you know what? I'm telling you, if God is God, and He is, doesn't He know what you need right now? And if you put yourself in a position to receive from Him, don't you know He's going to meet your need and help you recover the things that you're missing? Well, we've got a centering prayer workshop coming up Saturday, October 24th from 9 to 2 here on our Crosswinds campus. We are doing it safely, 6 feet apart, socially distanced. But we've got 2 spiritual directors who are trained in this practice of centering prayer, and they're going to come out and teach us how to do it. So I want you to join us. You can register online on our website. Don't miss the opportunity to experience the rest that your soul needs.
So make sure don't miss out on that one. You can register online. Church, we are so honored by your generosity. Thank you for being a part of all the amazing things happening here at Crosswinds and for accommodating the changing times by giving in different ways. Remember, you can mail in your giving, you can text into the number for a link, or you can go online. Thank you for the ways that you continue to love this church through your giving. Today, we continue exploring the gospel according to blank, and Chris is going to get to dig into one of Jesus' parables and what it has to say about how we view our status.
A certain man was preparing a great banquet. He invited many guests. Then the day of the banquet arrived. He sent his servant to those who had been invited. The servant told them, "Come, everything is ready now." But they all had the same idea. They began to make excuses. The first one said, "I have just bought a field. I have to go see it. Please excuse me." Another said, "I have just bought 5 pairs of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me." Still another said, "I just got married, so I can't come." The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry. He ordered his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the town. Bring in those who are poor. Also bring those who can't see or walk." "Sir," the servant said, "what you ordered has been done, but there is still room." Then the master told his servant, "Go out to the roads. Go out to the country lanes. Make the people come in. I want my house to be full."
Well, I have always loved that story you just heard, which is one that Jesus tells in the book of Matthew. And again, today, we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to try to explain this story. But before I do, let me ask you a question. And I think it's an appropriate question for a pastor in a church to ask, but it's going to require you to be a little bit reflective, not just throw out a knee-jerk answer. Here goes. If you had to pick one thing in your life keeping you from being more like Jesus, what would it be? Let me ask it again. If you had to pick one thing in your life that was getting in the way or keeping you from looking, acting, living more like Jesus, being more Jesus-like in who you are, your character, what would that one thing be? I imagine that some of you are answering lack of discipline. Like, if I could wake up every morning and spend more time in prayer or reading the Bible, that is my biggest thing. Discipline. I don't have enough. That's what's getting in my way. And that might be true. I would think some of you would say your patience. Like, you just don't have it. You're easily bothered by people and things, and maybe with your impatience comes a little bit of a temper or some passive-aggressive tendencies. Who knows? Might be patience, or it might be some other character quality, love, peace. Some of you would give a more practical answer. I can't walk on water. I can't raise someone from the dead. The biggest thing keeping me from being more like Jesus, I'm not a miracle worker. Touché, good point. Well, I think there is one thing most of us would overlook. And I think it's an answer that is probably true of almost all of us. If there's one thing in most of our lives keeping us from being more like Jesus, I wonder if that thing isn't pride. I want to read to you something that was said by a South African pastor, Andrew Murray. This is from his book, Humility, The Journey Toward Holiness. He writes this: "Pride must die in you, or nothing of heaven can live in you." Let me say that again. Pride must die in you, or nothing of heaven can live in you. Pride is this thing that we all have, that if we don't somehow find a way to let it die, then the kingdom of heaven can't live in us. And when we say that, the kingdom of heaven, that includes Jesus. Pride. And yet, when I say pride, it's an easy thing for you to hear and go, yeah, I guess that's true, but not really feel like it describes you. So let me drill it down a little bit further than pride. The kind of pride I'm talking about that needs to die so that heaven can live in you is the desire for status and our need to be honored by other people. There is something in us that so longs to know that we're higher up on the pecking order, that other people look at us and they think that we're important. There's something in each of us that wants people to know, as our friend Ron Burgundy has put it, that we're kind of a big deal. And I am telling you, this is universal. A few years ago, OkCupid, which was a dating website or a dating service, it asked a question of its people when they were filling out their profile. Here was a question: are you a genius? Now, according to Mensa, the society that actually measures IQ level, you have to have an IQ of 140 or higher to be a genius. And anywhere from like 0.25% to 1% of people actually qualify as genius. So that's like 1 in 100 people to 1 in 400. All right, how many men do you think said, yes, I am a genius on their dating profile? Go ahead, I'll let you guess with the person next to you. 2 out of 5, almost half. Now, what is that? What is that? That is our need for status and our desire to be honored coming out. And the reason that this must die in us for heaven to live, well, I don't need to tell you, because you see it. This pride thing leads to the divisiveness that we see so prevalent today in our culture and the rhetoric. And closer to home, I'm sure you've seen the desire to be the most honored cause business partnerships to come to an end. And you've watched the need for status get in the way of friendships. And you've seen all of this lead to the breakup of families, apologies not being spoken, forgiveness not being given, relationships kept from being healed. You've seen good things turn bad, and it is almost always about pride and status and honor. And I want to tell you, the story that you just heard, the story Jesus told, is all about this. But this story is not just a warning about your desire for status and honor, it's an antidote to it. within the story lies an incredibly special message for how to make heaven live in you, or really to live out heaven emanating from you. And I want to read the story with you again today, walking you through it piece by piece so you can see what this antidote is that Jesus was trying to give. It's found in Luke 14. And the background of the story, the situation is that Jesus is at the house of a Pharisee, and not just any Pharisee, but he's actually the leader of the Pharisees. And by the way, it's not just the Pharisee and his family who are at the house. It would seem from the passage there are other Pharisees there. There are lawyers there as well. And take a look at verse 7. This is the part right before the story that you just heard. It says, "When Jesus noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable." Okay, before we read it, I want you to know a few things. This is not just a dinner. Teachers would sometimes lecture or dialogue with their disciples in these banquet-type dinner things. Now, these guys are not his disciples, right? But they know that they've invited a teacher to dinner, and they've probably had a guest of honor come and teach them before over dinner. And when they did, people would sit according to their social rank at these banquets, according to their status. If you were a bigger deal, you sat closer to the teacher. The closer you got, the bigger deal you were. Now, this might make a little sense to you if you've ever been in the military or maybe on a ship or any kind of industry or group that values rank, right? This person's got 1 stripe. This person ranks above them. They've got 2. This woman has 5 stripes. She's in charge. But I don't want you to think they sat according to rank. It was not that well defined. You're going to see in a second, there was no assigned seating by rank. In fact, you sat where you thought your status in relation to the rest of the group should allow you to sit. You decided for yourself where you should be, which means you had to size everyone up, assess your status, and choose where you thought you belonged. But here's what it also meant. A dinner was an opportunity to move your status up. If with this group you were used to sitting 3 people away from the guest of honor, today may be the day that you just sit in the second seat and everybody goes, yeah, they're right. He is a second seat dude. That guy's on his way up. Where you sat affected other people's perceptions of your honor. Everybody knew how big of a deal you were or weren't by where you were seated. So where you sat mattered. Where you sat could be embarrassing that you weren't in a better seat, or it could be validating. So Jesus sees that they've all sat down according to where they think their status is, and he says to them this, verse 8. "When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. And if so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, 'Give this person your seat.' And then humiliated, you'll have to take the least important seat." Jesus, seeing that they've taken the seats of honor, he gives them a gentle reminder that this little status dance that they're doing, it can backfire. By the way, I say it's a reminder because this is something that they already knew. This thing that we just read Jesus say, it's in Proverbs 25. It's already in their scripture. Jesus reminds them of something they already know, that this is not wise to do because you could be humiliated. But knowing that they should already know this, it tells us something, right? That even when we know that our pride is a problem, it's hard to deny it. This need in us to be fed status and recognition, to have everybody see where you land on the pecking order. Jesus has been seeing into their hearts a little bit, right? These guys have been sizing each other up and figuring out where they stand or trying to show each other where they should stand. All right, verse 12. "He said to the one who invited him, 'When you give a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind.'" Okay, Jesus, having spoken to the guests who've been jockeying for position, he now turns to the guy who's hosting, and he says, "Why invite your peers at all to a banquet?" Let's be honest about why. He says, "You do it so that they will return the favor. You do it so they'll invite you to their party, and in so doing, you being on the invite list someday will make you feel like you're a person of status and honor. That's why you found the most important people you could find, so that someday they would invite you to their thing and you would look good and you would feel good. But Jesus, he says, I tell you, don't. Rather, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, the left out, left behind, and left over. Invite the people who cannot repay you, for when you do, you will be repaid by God. And it is at this that Jesus decides to tell them the story that you've already heard. Now, knowing all that background, let me read it again. Then Jesus said to them, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. Okay, invited many. I know I already alluded to this, but it is really important. So let me just hit it one more time. You could increase your status back then by inviting many guests to a banquet. The more people showed up, the bigger deal you were, assuming everyone you invited showed up. And by the way, the more respectable the guests, the greater your honor, your status. So lots of people invited, probably people of importance in the community in this story. And the reason, because if those people come to my banquet, my dinner, then I become a bigger deal. Verse 17. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. Okay, real quick, this is actually a second invitation. What you might not know unless you were part of that culture, these guests have already said yes to a previous first invitation. You don't just go and say, hey, dinner's ready, you want to come over? They've already been invited days, weeks, maybe even months earlier, and they've all said yes. So this is a servant who goes out to tell everybody who already said yes to the banquet that it's now ready. And the reason that this would happen in this culture, because a banquet like this required a lot of prep. Yes, 10 days ago, when the invitation first went out, you could have said, show up at 6 o'clock sharp, but if things weren't ready at 6, like the food was taking longer to cook, people would be standing around waiting. And again, these were important people you invited. So you would send someone to tell them, hey, everything's ready, the banquet is now starting. You know how when you go out to eat, sometimes restaurants will give you a pager and tell you not to go too far? This is their version of that. The servant tells the guest, everything is ready, your pager is going off. Verse 18, but they all began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a piece of land and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets. Another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. Please accept my regrets. Another said, I have just been married and therefore I cannot come. The guests start to say they can't come and they give terrible excuses. Apparently one of them bought land and now needs to see it. Come on, nobody bought land without seeing it. Another one bought oxen without trying them out, needed to go do that. He would have already tested the oxen. That makes no sense. Another one says, I just got married. I can't come. But weddings were planned way in advance. This guy never would have RSVP'd yes if there was a conflict like his wedding. These excuses are so bad and they are so obvious that it is clear they are meant to humiliate the guy who was throwing the dinner. Now, let me just make sure you get that. They are trying to embarrass the host, cut him down to size. Now, remember, this story comes on the heels of a discussion about seats of honor and pride and status. And Jesus has just reminded them, be wise, because it doesn't take much for someone to come and lower your status by asking you to switch seats with someone else, and that would be humiliating. But this story is now about a guy who's actually throwing the dinner, being humiliated by the guests, who publicly say that he is no longer important enough for them to show up. And guess what is happening? Whether he wants it or not, pride is dying in him. His friends are killing his pride. With each canceled RSVP, his status, his honor gets knocked down. But what do we know? That when pride dies in you, heaven can start to live. Verse 21. So the servant came back and reported this to his master. And then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." And so the servant does. And there is still room. And so the master says, "Go out to the roads and the country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet." Twice he says, "Go out into the roads and the alleys, the streets and the country lanes, and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." And just so it's clear, the connection between those two, people who were disabled often were making their living in their world in the streets and the lanes as beggars. They're sleeping in the alleys. When Jesus has this man in this story that Jesus is making up say, "Go to the streets and alleys," he's talking about the poorest of the poor, and Jesus is talking about the homeless. And what I want you to see, what I hope you see, is that in a situation where Jesus is faced with a bunch of men who are fighting for more status and who've made their life about receiving honor from everyone and being most important, and who are always looking for opportunities to increase their own status, Jesus tells them a story where pride dies in a guy who was trying to make a name for himself. And the man embraces it, and he uses this newfound humility to let heaven live in him by meeting others' needs and raising the status of someone else. He no longer uses what he has to show off his own status, but he decides to use what he has to raise the status of those with none. And my friends, what we learn in this story is that pride must die. And when it does, heaven starts to live in you. Heaven, where the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame, the left out, left behind, and left over, begin to see their needs met, their status raised through the generosity of the biggest banquet thrower of all, God. Jesus calls us to let pride die, our need for recognition and status and to be higher in the pecking order. And he calls us to let heaven live. He invites us to do that by increasing the status of others. And I want to tell you today that as much as usually in a message like this, I would turn a corner and I'd ask you to think about how God wants you to be doing that. Today, I want to spend a few minutes previewing how we are going to be doing that corporately, together as a church. Some of you have heard me talk about this thing we're doing here called Goodness Village. A few months ago, I kind of had to prematurely record a video explaining what all that Goodness Village stuff is about because our local newspapers had picked up and ran with that story. But my intention was always to tell you about it today. I won't go into all the details I've already gone into because those are available on that video I recorded. It's still there. If you haven't heard it or seen it, we'll link to it so you can catch all the vision. But I want to talk about it in the context of this message a little bit because, Crosswinds, this is what Jesus calls us to do. He says, "I have given you 35 acres of a beautiful campus to call home and to worship me on, and I love that you use it for that. But you know what else I want you to use it for? To throw a banquet and invite people in from the streets. I want you to use it to not just be a big church of status. I want you to use it to raise the status of others." And that is our plan with Goodness Village. And rather than preaching more today, I have invited Kim Curtis, who's the executive director of this thing, to come and just share with us a little bit, to let me ask questions about what this is going to be. So Kim, I know that we've been talking about Goodness Village for a while now. You've had a vision for this with us, but I know you've also had a vision for this before we did, before the county did. You've been praying about this for a long time. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So about 11, 12 years ago, Daniel, my husband, was asked to come out by Crosswinds over at the other facility to come out, assess the houses and see if they were livable. We decided that we would be able to renovate them for the staff. And we came out here in an RV one summer to complete the big house so that we could move into it with our two girls.
Yeah, you guys lived on this campus in our biggest farmhouse for how long?
We were in there, I think, probably about 8 years.
8 years, okay.
8 years before the outlets were there, before anything was here. So because we would walk the path around from one bridge to the other every night as a family, And we started to realize that likely these barns on the backside were inhabited by some homeless folks looking for a place to stay warm and be safe from the weather.
Before any of us were out here, people had found it, and we'd find mattresses and things like that in the barns.
Yeah, some clothes items, things like that. So we began walking it at night, being really loud, but with friendly tones, just kind of letting them know we're here too, and we know that you're here, but let's kind of share the space together. And then as we continued over the years, that changed into just praying that Crosswinds would see it as a place to offer that same safety and services to homeless.
Yeah, you've been praying that our church would get this vision for 12 years now, significantly longer than we've had it. And I like to think those are seeds you were planting to make this thing ultimately happen, which is so cool that now you're the one who's going to be leading it. So one of the things that people have heard me say a number of times as we've talked about this is that the number one cause of homelessness, we believe, is the profound catastrophic loss of family. I'm stealing that from Alan Graham down in Austin, Texas, who's written a whole book on this, but the profound catastrophic loss of family. You've worked with the homeless for a long time. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely would. Over my time working in this field, starting from a domestic violence shelter, street outreach, going into locked treatment facilities, and then at the jail, the common storyline, the theme has been the loss of family, whether from a child perspective of the trauma and abuse brought on by parents or their guardian, and then stories of losing their child as an adult, they lost their child or their partner, and just not being able to continue working or be functional in society.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard about the Bay Area, I think we probably all know this to be somewhat true. We've got people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and imagine if that's your situation and you lose your income like that. COVID is a really great example. If you don't have family who can maybe come alongside and help you till you can get back on your feet, you may find yourself in the situation that Goodness Village is trying to speak to, right? And I think what is often very different between me, who might be able to make it through some stuff in my life some hard times that might come, and somebody else's, whether they've got family who can be there alongside them in the midst of all of that.
Absolutely.
So part of where that matters for this is we're not just building 28 houses out here. This is not just about shelter and lodging. It's about community. If we really want to solve homelessness, we've got to speak to community. Talk to me about that. Why does that matter?
So I believe, after being in this and doing the shelter programs and transitional and putting people who are formerly homeless into housing, apartments, and seeing that not successful, I believe, and Austin kind of really put it into perspective, seeing it live, is that we need community and we need permanence. And those two things together can make a successful program, but just one of those, I believe it's a setup for failure. We need time to allow ourselves to rest and recover and grow. And we need a community to help rally around to create that safe space to find ourselves again.
I think there are all sorts of project, tiny home kind of things popping up around California, all over the country, really. What is different about this, and there are some like this that we're learning from, but what's really different about the model you're creating here is that community piece where people begin to build that family thing back again. And we know that means a number of things, right? It means while you have your own housing unit where you can make your meals, sleep, use your own bathroom, all that, we know there's also community meals at this. And we know there's classes at this. And what other kinds of services are part of something like this?
So there's a vocational piece to it that's going to help people identify what their passions might be, that is on a volunteer basis at first, that you show up on the day that you feel well enough to do it. And we know that each person that comes in is going to take their time, whatever time they need to kind of put roots in and rest and recover, and then begin to flourish and want to start to participate. So meeting with a vocational specialist to figure out what that passion is, from the gardening to maybe a janitorial, to maybe just creating, painting, beading, whatever that piece is inside yourself, just so that you feel like you're part of the world again. And then in that, building community around it as well. There is some case management that will come into it to make sure your medical appointments are happening. Maybe you have income as far as a general assistance, but maybe you qualify for an SSI income, and we can help lift you up in that way as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I think what you're describing is it's a place of dignity because people can have ownership in it. And it's more than a place that I just go stay for a couple of nights or even for 6 months. This is a place you may stay forever.
yes.
Yeah.
So we can take you from just surviving
Yeah.
and start thriving in your life.
We create that family thing that has been missing. So, okay, Kim, I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but there's this verse that says a prophet's without honor in their own country, their own hometown. You've been a part of this church for a very long time. Many people might know you as Daniel's wife.
Here.
Tell us, you're so much more than that. So
Thank you.
tell us about you and why we know you're the right person to be our executive director doing this.
Okay. Well,
Like you were 13?
13, I was hanging out Pal Street and Market
Yeah.
with the homeless community. I would ride BART in with a friend of mine who would head forward to where we were supposed to be going, and I would go to McDonald's and purchase meals, and then I would go sit and ask about the stories. I just wanted to, I thought that people chose homelessness, and I wanted to know why you would choose that over your being at home.
Yeah.
And in that, I actually just realized this morning, in that I think I was gifted in wanting to break bread, wanting to hear stories. I mean, I didn't even think about that I could have bought those meals and dropped them and kept walking like a lot of people do.
You wanted to get close up with people.
I
And
wanted
really,
to.
yeah.
I wanted to spend that time, and in that I would hear stories at a young age that by the time I got to my adulthood, I had no judgment.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that your story is not somebody else's story, and that your decisions are not completely understandable by everybody, but that there's a history.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know what it was. And I think my perspective coming in of non-judgment is what gives people the ability to talk to me.
But you're more than a former 13-year-old who'd go hang out with
True.
people in the Tenderloin. You've got education in this and career, like time put in. So tell us about some of that.
So I started out I was getting my AA in criminal justice. The plan was to go into juvenile probation. In the meantime, I went to work for a women's domestic violence shelter. And from there, I turned down the probation job because I felt my heart was there, and just kept moving through. I was overseeing the winter relief shelter, and then I went to Abode Services, where I was getting my bachelor's in human services during that time.
Yeah.
And then found that I met my ceiling, so I went back to get my master's degree.
Yeah.
And then I got certified in substance abuse, so that I had that understanding of
Yeah.
why drugs instead of psychiatric medications. So
Yeah.
that background was really important in working with people. And yeah, I'm a licensed clinical social worker now.
Yeah. With your own private practice as well. Yeah. There's never been anyone more qualified to do a job out here on this campus than you are qualified to do this job. So,
Thank you.
so to that, what would make you, with all of that time put in, and all, we're talking about status in this message today and honor, and you certainly have plenty of that. What would make you say, I'm going to go work with 28 people in a village on Crosswinds campus? That's worth my time.
Right. And we talked about that. That's everyone's question that they've always asked me, and I've honestly answered, I don't really know what else I would be doing. I've joked that I would love to be an accountant because it just seems like it wouldn't have that emotional toll.
Really? An
Yeah,
accountant?
but that's not true, because what we've learned is I'm not good with that. But I do say, like, it would just sometimes be easier. The stories that I get to hold and to hear and be trusted with are just heavy.
Yeah.
And it's an honor to have them, but sometimes it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to do it, but I feel really blessed to hear these stories. I feel just that moment to share space with somebody, to look you in the eye and lift you up as a human is important to me.
I love that you would use your status, all the money that went into school, all the time that went into growing to who you are. You'd use it to raise somebody else's status. And in this case, to really take people who have, as we heard today in this parable, been in the streets, the alleys, the roads, and say, come to the banquet, and I'm going to use this banquet to elevate how people think of you. Okay, one last question. How can people get involved? What does it look like for Crosswinds to get involved with this?
Awesome. We need volunteers, lots of volunteers.
Yeah.
Come out, share space, time with people. They're not here to be planted here and we forget the village is there. Interact with them as humans, as you would with anybody else. We need people that will donate their time, their talents, their resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part of what makes this a community and not just housing is that people from our community at large here in the Tri-Valley say, I want to go hang out in that community. I want to serve in that community. I want to come help work in the garden that those people are working in. I want to come and just sit with somebody on their porch and get to know them and have a conversation. Or I'm good at this. I could bring that into somebody's life. And if they want to do that, they can contact you.
Yes.
All right, Kim, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. For the last 7 years, a Canadian sculptor has been placing a sculpture he's made in cities across the globe. All over the world, he puts this thing. The sculpture is life-size, and it depicts a homeless man sleeping on a bench. One of the places he tends to put this is in front of churches to see how they respond. Like once he put it in front of an Episcopalian church in an upscale neighborhood in North Carolina. And what do you think happened when a woman saw this in front of her church? She called the police. Another person saw it, figured out that it was artwork, not a real person on a bench, and wrote a letter of complaint to the newspaper. From a distance, this very real-looking sculpture looks like an anonymous homeless person sleeping under a blanket. But if you get close up, what you realize is that the statue has gaping wounds in its hands and feet, and the person under the blanket is actually Jesus. The artist named the sculpture Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is where Jesus says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." And the people answered, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" And he replied, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Crosswinds, we have been given an opportunity to live out, to do for Jesus, because we do for the least of these. And as you heard from Kim, to do it in a way that makes a significant difference. We can do Goodness Village and actually bring dignity and status back to people who don't have it. We can invite people to the banquet from the streets and the alleys, but to do it, it will take us letting go of our pride. So I want to ask you to do something. Will you consider how you might help make this happen? For what it's worth, the answer is not money. That's not to say this thing couldn't use donations, but preparing a banquet is bigger than just paying for it. It's preparing it, and it's serving it, and it's hanging with the guests at the banquet, and there'll be so many opportunities to do that in Goodness Village. Would you let pride die in you and let heaven live in you by working with us to increase the status of the left out, left behind, and left over?
You've just heard about how we as a Crosswinds community are inviting the left out, the left behind, and the left over to the banquet table, specifically to Goodness Village, a community for our unhoused neighbors. We're about to have a time of worship where you can reflect on the challenge that Chris had for us today. He asked us to be considering how God might be calling each of us to be part of Goodness Village. Maybe you had an immediate sense of how you'd like to support it. Or maybe you've just started to catch the vision and are only beginning to think about your role in it. Either way, use this time during worship to listen to how God will lead you as you consider how you might use your status to raise up someone else's.
song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Whoa. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. So holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are, and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, and all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. Beautiful Savior, you have brought me near. You pulled me from the ashes, you have broken every curse. Blessed Redeemer, you have set this captive free. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, and all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are, and all your promises are yes and amen. And all your promises are yes and amen. And I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness.
Praise you that even as life is uncertain and this world around us falls apart, Lord, that you are with us. You are always protecting us, even when we can't see that, God. We love you so much, and we thank you for the